June 10th, 323 BCE. Babylon, the richest city in the ancient world, has fallen silent. For 11 agonizing days, something has been stalking the corridors of the greatest palace ever built. Not an army, not a rebellion, death itself. And it's come for the one man who thought he was immortal. You're witnessing the final moments of human history's most successful conqueror. The man lying in that bed ruled more territory than Julius Caesar, Napoleon, and Genghis Khan combined. His name was Alexander of Macedon. By age 32, he had built an empire stretching from Greece to India. Never lost a single battle. His soldiers worshipped him as the son of Zeus. Kings begged for his mercy. But power, real power, comes with a price that few understand. And that price was about to be paid in full. What you're seeing isn't just the death of a king. It's the collapse of the ancient world's only superpower. In a few hours, the largest empire in human history will shatter into pieces. Millions will die in the wars that follow. All because of what happened in this room. Over these 11 days of hell, the physicians are baffled. The greatest medical minds of the ancient world have no answers. Alexander's body is destroying itself from within, yet his mind remains sharp as a blade. He knows exactly what's happening to him. Here's what will shock you. This death defied every law of medicine known to the ancient world. And even today, with all our modern knowledge, we still can't explain what killed Alexander the Great. Was it disease? Was it poison slipped into his wine by a trusted ally? Or was it something even more sinister? The price of absolute power finally coming due? What I'm about to tell you is a story that reads like a political thriller. One that involves palace intrigue, potential murder, and a mystery that has puzzled historians for over 2,000 years. Because the man who conquered the world couldn't conquer the one enemy that mattered most. And that enemy was about to destroy everything he had built. To understand this tragedy, we need to step back 1 year. To May 324 BCE, when Alexander stood at the absolute pinnacle of human achievement. Picture this. You're 32 years old in an era when most people died before 40. You rule an empire that spans 3 continents. You've personally led your armies across 22,000 miles of hostile territory. Every enemy who faced you is either dead or bowing at your feet. Your empire generates wealth beyond imagination. The gold and silver flowing into your treasury would make modern billionaires weep with envy. You've founded over 20 cities, most named after yourself. You've literally reshaped the map of the known world. But here's what the history books rarely mention. By 324 BCE, success was eating Alexander alive from the inside. His army was exhausted. These weren't professional soldiers with rotating deployments. These were farmers and merchants who'd been away from home for over 13 years. They'd followed Alexander to the edge of the world, but they wanted to go home. His closest friends were turning against him. The Macedonian nobles who'd grown up with him were horrified by what he'd become. He was adopting Persian customs, demanding to be worshipped as a living god, and planning military campaigns that seemed impossible even by his standards. And Alexander himself? He was showing signs of what we'd now recognize as severe psychological breakdown. He'd already murdered his best friend Cletus during a drunken argument. He'd forced his generals to marry Persian women to create his vision of a unified empire. Most disturbing of all, he was planning new conquests that defied all logic. After ruling the largest empire in history, Alexander wanted more. He was planning to invade Arabia, then conquer all of Africa, then turn west toward Rome and the unconquered lands beyond. The man who had everything wasn't satisfied. He couldn't be satisfied, and that insatiable hunger was about to lead him to a dinner party that would change the course of history. What happened on the night of May 29th, 323 BCE? And why do some of the world's leading historians believe it was the beginning of a carefully orchestrated murder? May 29th, 323 BCE. The party is being held at the palace of Medius, one of Alexander's closest drinking companions. If you were wealthy and connected in the ancient world, this is exactly the kind of evening you'd want to attend. The wine is flowing freely. Not just any wine. This is vintage from Greece mixed with the finest spirits from across the empire. The food is exotic delicacies from India, spices from Arabia, delicacies that most people couldn't even imagine. Alexander is in rare form. For once, he seems relaxed. Almost happy. His drinking heavily, nothing unusual there. But his laughing with his friends, sharing stories from their campaigns, reminiscing about the old days. But several ancient historians noted something odd about this particular evening. Alexander seemed to be drinking more than usual. And that's saying something, because Alexander was famous for his ability to consume enormous quantities of wine. Here's where the story takes a sinister turn. According to multiple sources, including the historian Plutarch, something changed during the evening. Alexander was drinking from a large cup. Some sources say it held nearly 2 liters of wine, when he suddenly cried out. Witnesses described it as if he'd been struck by an arrow in his liver. Alexander doubled over in pain, grabbed his stomach, and had to be helped from the party. Now, you might think this was just too much alcohol. Alexander had done this before. But here's what should make you suspicious. Within hours, Alexander was experiencing symptoms that no amount of wine could explain. The pain in his abdomen was excruciating and constant. He developed a high fever that wouldn't break. He was vomiting repeatedly, but couldn't keep even water down. By the next morning, the most powerful man on earth couldn't stand without assistance. His personal physician, Philip of Acarnania, was baffled. He treated Alexander through dozens of battle wounds, illnesses, and injuries over the years. But he'd never seen anything like this. The symptoms were consistent with acute poisoning. But who would dare poison Alexander the Great? And more importantly, who had access to his wine cup that night? The list of suspects is shorter than you might think. Because to get close enough to Alexander to poison his drink, you'd need to be someone he trusted completely. Someone who'd been with him for years. Someone who knew his habits, his routines, his weaknesses. Someone like a close friend, a trusted general, or even a member of his own family. What happened over the next 10 days would either be the slowest, most agonizing natural death in recorded history, or the most sophisticated political assassination ever carried out. Day 1 after the party, Alexander wakes in his palace chambers and immediately knows something is terribly wrong. The pain in his abdomen is unlike anything he's experienced, and this is a man who's taken sword wounds, arrow strikes, and battle injuries that would kill most people. But Alexander is stubborn. He's spent his entire adult life pushing through pain, ignoring injuries, refusing to show weakness. He tries to continue with his normal routine. He holds court, meets with his generals, discusses plans for the Arabian campaign. By evening, he can't hide it anymore. The fever spikes. He's sweating profusely but shivering with cold. His servants have to help him to bed. Day 2. The vomiting begins. Violent, uncontrollable retching that brings up nothing but bile. Alexander can't keep food down. Can't even hold water. His personal cook, who's prepared thousands of meals for him over the years, watches helplessly as everything he tries to feed his master comes back up. Day 3. This is when Alexander's inner circle begins to panic. The fever has reached dangerous levels. His skin is burning hot to the touch. He's become so weak that he can barely sit up in bed. But here's what's truly disturbing. Alexander's mind remains completely clear. He's not delirious. He's not hallucinating. He understands exactly what's happening to his body, and he knows he might be dying. Day 4. Alexander makes a decision that will haunt historians for centuries. He calls for his royal seal, the ring that validates every order in his empire, and he gives it to Perdiccas, one of his generals. When asked who should inherit his throne, Alexander whispers, "To the strongest." Those 3 words will lead to 40 years of civil war and the deaths of millions of people. Day 5. The fever breaks briefly. For a few hours, Alexander seems to improve. His generals rush to his bedside, thinking he might recover. Some start making plans for the continuation of his campaigns. They're wrong. Day 6 brings something even more frightening. Alexander begins to lose his voice. The man who commanded armies with his oratory, who could inspire soldiers to follow him to the ends of the earth, can barely speak above a whisper. Day 7, 8, 9. Each day worse than the last. Alexander's body is systematically shutting down. His extremities are cold, but his core temperature remains dangerously high. He can't move without help. He can't eat. He can barely drink. But through it all, his mind remains trapped inside his failing body, fully aware of every moment of agony. Day 10. Alexander's breathing becomes labored. Shallow, rapid breaths that suggest his lungs are beginning to fail. His closest companions take turns sitting with him, but there's nothing they can do except watch. Day 11. June 10th, 323 BCE. Around 6 in the evening, Alexander's breathing stops. The greatest conqueror in human history dies in the same bed where he spent the last 11 days in agony. But here's where the mystery deepens. Because what happened to Alexander's body after death would shock even his battle-hardened veterans. In the scorching heat of a Babylonian summer, with temperatures over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, Alexander's corpse showed no signs of decay. For 6 full days. No decomposition. No smell. No discoloration. It was as if time had stopped. His generals were terrified. Some whispered that it proved Alexander really was the son of Zeus. Others feared he might actually return from the dead. But modern medical experts have a far more chilling explanation. What if Alexander wasn't really dead when they thought he died? For those of you with medical experience, you know that in extreme heat, a human body begins decomposing within hours of death. The process is unstoppable. It's basic biology. But Alexander's body defied this fundamental law of nature. For 6 days in the heat of summer, he remained perfectly preserved. No bloating. No odor. His skin color remained normal. Dr. Catherine Hall, a modern toxicologist from New Zealand's University of Otago, has spent years studying this phenomenon. Her conclusion is deeply disturbing. Alexander might not have been dead at all. Dr. Hall believes Alexander suffered from Guillain-Barré syndrome, a rare neurological condition that can cause complete paralysis while leaving the victim fully conscious. The person appears dead, no detectable pulse, no visible breathing, but their mind remains active and aware. Imagine being trapped in your own body, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to even blink to signal that you're still alive, but fully conscious of everything happening around you, including preparations for your own funeral. This condition can be triggered by various factors: infections, toxins, even extreme stress. And it would explain why Alexander's body remained preserved. Dead tissue decomposes. Living tissue, even paralyzed tissue, doesn't. But this raises an even more horrifying question. If Alexander was still alive when they declared him dead, what killed him? The original illness? Or did he die slowly, trapped and helpless, over those 6 days? The ancient sources give us some clues. They describe how Alexander's generals argued over his succession while his body lay in state. How they fought over who would control his empire. How they divided up his territories like spoils of war. If Alexander was still conscious during this time, he would have heard every word. He would have witnessed the destruction of everything he'd built, powerless to stop it. But there's another possibility that's even more sinister. What if the paralysis wasn't natural? What if it was induced by poison specifically chosen to create this effect? Because if you wanted to murder Alexander the Great and get away with it, you wouldn't want him to die immediately. You'd want time to establish your alibi. Time to position yourself for the power struggle that would follow. And you'd want everyone to believe it was natural death. So who had the knowledge to pull off such a sophisticated assassination? Who had access to rare poisons? And most importantly, who had the most to gain from Alexander's death? Let's examine the evidence like a criminal investigation. Because if Alexander was murdered, his killer was someone close to him. Someone who understood his routines, his habits, his vulnerabilities. Suspect number 1, Cassander, son of Antipater. Antipater had been Alexander's regent in Macedonia while he was off conquering the world. But recently, Alexander had begun to suspect Antipater of disloyalty. There were reports of corruption, of Antipater acting like an independent king rather than an appointed governor. Alexander had already sent orders for Antipater to be arrested and brought to Babylon for execution. Cassander, Antipater's son, was in Babylon when Alexander died. He had motive, opportunity, and access. Here's what's particularly damning. After Alexander's death, Cassander became one of the most powerful men in the empire. He eventually had Alexander's mother, wife, and son murdered to secure his own position. Suspect number 2, Alexander's own bodyguards. These were elite soldiers who'd sworn to protect Alexander with their lives. But by 323 BCE, even his closest allies were growing tired of his increasingly erratic behavior. Alexander had become paranoid, violent, and unpredictable. He'd killed friends in fits of rage. He was planning military campaigns that would mean decades more of warfare. Some historians believe his bodyguards may have decided that Alexander had become a threat to the very empire he'd created. The most chilling aspect of this theory? His bodyguards would have had access to his food and drink at all times. They would have known exactly when and how to strike. Suspect number 3, Roxana, Alexander's Persian wife. Roxana was pregnant with Alexander's heir, but her position was precarious. Alexander had been talking about marrying a Roman noblewoman to cement an alliance with Rome. If he took another wife, Roxana's son might not inherit the throne. Ancient sources describe Roxana as ambitious and ruthless. After Alexander's death, she had his other wives murdered to eliminate competition for her son. But here's the most intriguing possibility. What if it wasn't just one person? What if multiple conspirators worked together to poison Alexander? The poison most likely to cause Alexander's symptoms was hellebore, also known as White Death. It was tasteless when mixed with wine, caused severe abdominal pain and fever, and could take days or weeks to kill. Hellebore was available to the wealthy and well-connected. It had been used in political assassinations before. And most importantly, it was sophisticated enough that the death would appear natural. But there's still one problem with the poison theory. Hellebore wouldn't explain why Alexander's body remained preserved after death, unless there were two separate attempts on his life. The first with hellebore, the second with something that would cause paralysis and preserve the body as a message to anyone else who might threaten the conspirators. Or maybe the truth is even darker than murder. What if Alexander wasn't killed by an enemy at all? What if he was destroyed by something far more personal and familiar to many people our age? The accumulated damage of decades of poor choices. Alexander was an alcoholic. The ancient sources are clear about this. He regularly drank for days at a time. Victory celebrations that lasted weeks. Drinking competitions that could kill lesser men. Modern physicians who've studied Alexander's symptoms believe he may have suffered from acute pancreatitis brought on by chronic alcohol abuse. The pain would have been excruciating, described by patients as feeling like being burned alive from the inside. The progression fits perfectly. Sudden, severe abdominal pain after heavy drinking, followed by high fever, vomiting, and eventual organ failure. But there's something even more tragic here. Alexander was showing clear signs of what we'd now recognize as severe mental illness in his final years. The paranoia, the violent mood swings, the grandiose delusions about conquering the entire world, the inability to form stable relationships or trust even his closest friends. Some modern psychiatrists believe Alexander was suffering from bipolar disorder, made worse by alcohol and the crushing psychological pressure of absolute power. Think about the impossible position he was in. He'd achieved everything humanly possible by age 30. He'd conquered the known world. What do you do for an encore? Where do you go when you've already climbed the highest mountain? The answer, for Alexander, was always the same: more. More territory, more conquests, more power. But more was never enough. It could never be enough. So maybe the real killer wasn't a political conspiracy. Maybe it was something far more common and tragic. A brilliant, driven man who couldn't handle his own success. A man who self-medicated with alcohol, isolated himself with paranoia, and drove away everyone who might have helped him. In the end, Alexander the Great may have been killed by the same demons that destroy successful people today. Addiction, mental illness, and the crushing weight of being trapped at the top. Alexander died alone in that Babylonian palace. The man who'd commanded millions in life had only a handful of servants with him at the end. Within months of his death, his empire collapsed. His generals fought wars that lasted for decades. His family was murdered. His dream of a unified world died with him. But the mystery of how he died remains unsolved after 2,300 years. Was it murder? Disease? Self-destruction? The truth died with Alexander in that palace chamber. And perhaps that's fitting, because Alexander represents something timeless about human ambition and its consequences. The idea that you can conquer the world but never conquer yourself. That success can become its own prison. That power, absolute power, corrupts absolutely. Look around today. How many leaders, how many successful people are following the same path, chasing power and achievement at the cost of their health, their relationships, their sanity? Alexander's story isn't ancient history. It's a mirror, a warning about what happens when ambition becomes addiction, when success becomes self-destruction. Because in the end, the greatest conqueror in history learned the hardest lesson of all. You can rule the entire world, but if you can't rule yourself, you've conquered nothing. The horrific end of Alexander the Great. A mystery that reminds us that even legends are mortal. Even gods can fall. And sometimes, the greatest enemy is the one staring back at you in the mirror.